בשנת 2011, בעקבות האביב הערבי, חל זעזוע במזרח התיכון, ושליטי מצרים, לוב, טוניסיה ותימן הודחו. מאז ראה המזרח התיכון את המלחמה בסוריה, את עלייתו ונפילתו של דאעש ואירועים דרמטיים נוספים. 9 שנים מתחילת הטלטלה האזורית ממשיך להתנהל מאבק על דמותו של המזרח התיכון בשני מישורים. הראשון הוא על הסדר האזורי. נאבקים בו 4 מחנות. הציר הרדיקלי שיעי המובל על ידי איראן, האסלאמיסטים המונהגים על ידי האחים המוסלמים ותומכיהם, הג'יהאדיסטים של דאעש ואל-קאעידה, והמדינות הסוניות הפרגמטיות. כל המחנות נלחמים על האינטרסים שלהם בסוגיות חיוניות. השפעת המערב, נוכחות איראנית באזור, שלמות טריטוריאלית, אסלאם פוליטי, עדתיות והמודלים הנוכחים לצורות הממשל. המישור השני של המאבק הוא בתוך המדינות, בין השליטים לבין הציבורים סביב בעיות היסוד, אבטלה, חוסר שוויון, תלות בנפט והכנסות חיצוניות, כמו גם סכסוכי זהות, עמדתם של המיעוטים, מתחים בין סונים לשיעים ועימותים בין שבטים. ב-2019 המאבק התחמם. לצד הזירות הבוערות של סוריה, תימן ולוב, הודחו השליטים באלג'יריה וסודאן, והיו מחאות משמעותיות בעיראק, בלבנון ואף באיראן. לאן המאבק יגיע בשנה הקרובה? איך ייראה המזרח התיכון בעשור הבא? וכיצד הוא משפיע על ישראל?
Hello everyone, I'm Sarah Feuer. I'm a researcher in the Institute. This video you just saw, it reflects some of the insights in the Institute's National Strategic Assessment, in which we had described the key struggles characterizing the region since the upheaval or the Arab Spring almost 10 years ago. Here in this session we would like to talk about the second struggle, the one that takes place between the people and their leaders as we look at the public opinion of these peoples, and we're going to go over the results of a surfers survey that we conducted in recent months. The idea behind this poll, this survey, was the Institute's idea to start posting in Arabic in its Facebook page, and which refer to publications and the Institute's events, and we discovered that there was significant interest in the Institute's materials, interest from citizens of neighboring countries, Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, and even Iraq. So far these posts have received an exposure of have been exposed to almost 1 million people and received hundreds of thousands of likes and comments, and I'd like to thank Funia, the digital marketing company that helps the Institute reach these people. And in recent months we've decided to make use of this connection, this relationship between the Institute and these population groups, and we have gathered a few insights from this poll, and in order to introduce them I'd like to invite my colleague Dr. Khader Sawaed, my colleague from the INSS. Khader, please. Well, first of all, before we move on to the poll, I'd like to ask you about the relatively high level of interest from the surfers in the materials of the Institute. What do you think can explain this interest? Well, first of all, hello. Can everybody hear me now? Look, what can explain? Well, there are 3 main things that can explain. First of all, there's the Palestinian issue. The Palestinian issue, in contrast to the situation among many leaders in the Arab world who don't take any interest in the Palestinian issue, well, it does still interest the people, the general public, the Arab nations. It's still a burning issue for them. It's still very important for them. Another issue is that we indeed deal a lot in the Palestinian issue. And the second point is the relevance of the Institute's publications. We make things accessible in Arabic, things that are relevant and important, not just to the Palestinian issue, but also issues, various domestic political issues, and issues, for example, that are related to society, critical topics such as gas, the discoveries of gas in the Mediterranean, things that people want to know about. And another point which is important for us, it's important that we always remember this, is that 50% of the Arab world is comprised of young people. Over 50% of people in the Arab world are younger than 35 years old, and they're constantly there. This is where they're at. And these people, this population group, you can't fool them anymore with all the media in the Arab world that is establishment based. And our scholars, the INSS scholars, they write based on some very serious work, and perhaps if we can boast, our work is top quality and objective. We are the leading institute in the region and even one of the leading institutes in the world in this field. So yes, they are smart consumers of important and accurate information. So you had mentioned the Palestinian issue. In our poll, we asked a few questions regarding the option that perhaps Israel will reach some kind of an arrangement with the Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So what did we learn from the poll on this matter? Well, I hope you can see. What's the slide that you see here? Well, let's assume that they do. The previous slide. Okay. So regarding an arrangement between Israel and Hamas, we had asked this question. There is a lot of support. The majority is in favor of an arrangement with the Palestinians because they think about that it's in the best interest of the Palestinians. We also asked what's important, what are the most important elements in the arrangement, and this is a question that we address to two population groups, the broader public in the Arab world, and the majority supported the fact that they need more work visas and freedom of movement within Israel. And then we asked the Palestinian people this question, and 4,300 people responded, and the results emphasize the interest and the desire to have more work visas, more employment opportunities, and freedom of movement for Palestinians inside Israel, because once people receive an option to work and they had freedom of movement, then they live normal lives and they can also provide for all their daily needs, their existential needs. Now let's move on to the subject of Iran. And here it's important to mention that this poll was conducted before the targeting of elimination of Soleimani, so we better take that into account. But what did we learn about the perceptions in the region towards Iran and towards Israel? It is known to us that the Arab world isn't, a big fan of Zion. That's an statement, of course. And when it comes to the issue of Iran in the Middle East, it doesn't gain a lot of sympathy as well. We were interested to know. We wanted to see what's the situation there exactly. Well, we asked. Yes. Okay, now you can see this. So we asked the question: There's a problem with the pointer? No? So we had asked a question regarding which elements have the most negative influence, and Iran was perceived as having the most negative influence, perceived as the player with the most negative influence in the region, and Israel is twice as much as Israel, 36 versus 18, and Israel is situated along the same position as the Arab leaders, more or less, and of course less than the US as a negative factor. So Israel was ranked number 3 in our poll. We asked a question regarding the position or chances for war. We wanted to know if there is a conflict, a struggle between Israel and Iran. So first of all, we asked about the chances for such a conflict to occur, and the majority saw that the chances for that were low based on quite a few strategic assessments, some that were made known in the Institute, some that were published in the Institute, and also in other places. And here the more interesting question is, in case of war between Israel and Iran, who will you support? Well, a relative majority said that they wouldn't support any of the parties, and those who did choose sides, those who did have a position, 1/3 chose to support Israel, said that they would support Israel, and only 29% said that they would express their support, would support Iran. And some people will say it's a small sample. Well, I compared it to other places, other polls, and a lot of places that held internet polls, there was willingness to support Israel much more than you see the willingness to support Iran. And I checked something else. I took the data from the Arab Barometer poll, a multi-annual poll that is being conducted in the past decade in the Arab world, and it includes 25,000 interviewees or participants every year. It is a reliable poll that is done by Professor Amani Jamal at the Princeton University, a highly respectable university. And in this poll, you can see that in the past decade, the level of antagonism towards Iran in the Arab world has risen 2.5 to 3 times. If you offset the data for Iraq, then the level is even higher. The antagonism is due to the rigid intervention of Iran, the hardline intervention in other Arab arenas. Bahrain, there was an attempt to undermine the regime in Iraq, in Lebanon, and obviously in Yemen and Syria. So ultimately, I'd like to ask about the participants themselves. I did get to travel a bit in North African countries and Jordan, and I always got this feeling that despite all the cultural, perhaps religious differences, ultimately people in these countries, their concerns are the same concerns that we have. So what did we learn in this survey regarding the topics that preoccupy the people living in the region? And, the issues that preoccupy Arab citizens, the Arab world, as one can see here, are first and foremost corruption, unemployment, and the desire to receive better government services. People are sick and tired of, all the red tape and the unemployment that only brings poverty and crime. and the rise in the levels of crime and lack of social welfare in the Arab countries that are, poor countries anyhow. And if one looks at sectorialism and the ethnic rifts and the fear of fundamentalism and religious radicalism and things that are related to identity, then that comes at a lower level. One can explain it, for example, how today ISIS defeat had its outcomes. People are less concerned with that. People are more concerned with things that are related to their daily lives, and you can see that in the data presented regarding the Palestinians. That's correct. Okay, then let's wait and see where this dialogue between the Institute and the Internet surface will lead us. So thank you very much for these insights, and thank you very much, everyone.